How's everybody doing today? So, for the last couple of days, I have not put up a video, and mostly this is because there hasn't been a singular subject that I had enough new information on to make an entire video without delving deep into the realm of opinion. And while I don't mind editorializing a little bit, I've said many times that I want to heavily focus this channel around being just the facts, an unbiased source of news. In order to kind of rectify this situation, what I'm going to do here is give you a rundown of a handful of important stories, but ones which wouldn't take up enough time to merit a full video. Much in a very similar format to a traditional news show, or a show that I did in a very early iteration of this channel called Weekly Recap. So without any further ado, let's get into our first story. A large caravan of immigrants, apparently originating in Honduras, although it was pointed out to me by my editor that there were pictures there of people carrying Mexican flags, not Honduran flags. But a large caravan of immigrants is heading through right now southern Mexico. Last I checked, they were in the province of Chiapas and were making their way northward. Now, this has led to renewed calls from a lot of Trump supporters and right-leaning individuals to redouble Trump's efforts to build a wall on America's southern border. Now, as I said earlier, I don't want to editorialize too much, but I do just want to note here that I think that this issue has been over-politicized to the point where neither side is really thinking rationally. The fact of the matter is that while there would be some minute benefits to building a wall on the U.S.-Mexico border, the cost would dramatically outweigh those benefits. But on the other hand, there's only so much immigration that we can absorb from the downtrodden peoples of southern Mexico and Central America. And if a true humanitarian effort were to be made, a much better, more cost-effective, and more wide-reaching way to benefit these people would probably be to set up some sort of program to try and stabilize the region and provide economic opportunity to people living in areas like Honduras. Now, Honduras has the highest crime rates of anywhere in Latin America and the Caribbean, and the city of San Pedro Sula in Honduras has the second highest homicide rate per capita of any city in the world, and the highest homicide rate per capita is in Caracas, Venezuela, which is also in the same general region. So, I mean, to be able to assist with the danger of living down there, the corruption that exists down there, so on and so forth, would be a much better benefit to these people, while also not hurting the impoverished and the immigrants that are already here in America, who are really the ones who would suffer from a huge influx of people migrating into the United States, and especially from the crackdowns that would then later ensue as a result of this. Now, another result of this is the effect that it's had on a lot of upcoming midterm races, such as the Senate race in Tennessee between Phil Bresden and Marsha Blackburn. Now, as we talked about in our video about that race, Bresden definitely needed to pull some swing vote in the heavily red Tennessee to be able to hope to beat Blackburn out in this race. His chances of that are pretty much dashed after this issue of immigration has come to the forefront. A recent poll shows that 78% of likely Republican voters in Tennessee prefer Blackburn's immigration policies to a mere 8% preferring Bresden's. And with this issue being brought to the forefront so close to actual ballot casting time, I think that may be the nail in the coffin for Phil Bresden. Now on to the next story. Out of Florida, we have seen a recent poll come out that shows Senator Bill Nelson ahead of Governor Rick Scott by 6 points in the race for Bill Nelson's Senate seat. The reason that this is of note to me, and the reason that I wanted to talk about this, is because of how heavily this particular poll has been covered. This one poll by Quinnipiac got headlines from CNN, MSNBC, The Hill, and USA Today, just to name a few, touting it as kind of a pretty clear sign of victory for Nelson. The problem being that on the same day, a poll was also published showing Rick Scott ahead by 1 point. And in truth, the vast majority of polling shows Nelson ahead by about a margin of 1 to 3 points. The reason I wanted to talk about this just really briefly is because I think it so clearly exemplifies the way that news outlets on both the left and the right constantly choose to cherry-pick information to suit whatever makes them comfortable, I guess would be the way to say it. The thing is, I don't know if this helps anybody except for the opponent of the candidate that you're supporting. Because if anything, the only takeaway that people would have from this story is, oh, I was going to support Nelson, but he's so far ahead that I guess I really don't need to go vote. It's not that big a deal, he's gonna win anyway. Just like, if anything, that was the result of a lot of the polls saying that Hillary Clinton was going to win the presidential election in a landslide, and I'm sure that there were more than a few people around the United States who simply said, hey, I don't need to leave work and go spend my time voting and maybe lose money over this because Hillary's gonna win anyway. Not that I think that would have affected the outcome of the election to any major degree, but I'm sure that there were definitely some people who felt that way. But the more important factor here is that especially when releasing empirical data like poll data, I feel that it's important to release as much data as is possibly pertinent so that an honest picture can be formed. Because one poll, which on average, as somebody who's looked at more than a few polls, especially recently, one poll can be a survey of anywhere from like 200 to 2,000 people in a state with a population in the tens of millions. And therefore it's important that we take as many of these polls as possible and aggregate the data and try and get the best picture that we possibly can of possible results to the election. In the last of the major news stories that we have to cover, the official Saudi statement on the disappearance, now death, of Jamal Kashoggi has been released. Now, much as was assumed, this has been entirely blamed on rogue actors acting without the authority of the prince. There are, I believe, 15 people who have been implicated in this as suspects. The Saudis' initial statements indicate that they're going to try them in their own court system. Additionally, 2 senior members of the Crown Prince's administration, if you would, have also been removed from their posts for neglect or for, kind of, they should have known about this or had some sort of second-hand involvement in this. Now, without getting too into repeating things that I've already said, pretty much exactly what I said was going to happen here happened here. They called this exactly how I said they were going to call it. So far, the U.S. response has not been much. As I said, a lot of U.S. businesses have pulled out of the economic conference happening over there, although that conference still did go on. And also, like I said, in much higher attendance there now are people from businesses in Russia and China and the Far East, who are then going to proceed to pick up those economic opportunities that the American businesses are leaving behind. Again, and it's an unfortunate truth of the reality of the way the world works. The only people who are, in the end, going to be hurt by this are American businesses and American workers who may have otherwise received jobs from those business dealings between Saudi Arabia and those American businesses. Saudi Arabia is still going to spend the money that they were always going to spend to try and develop and advance their economy and their global business dealings. Only now, instead of that money benefiting American businesses, it's going to benefit Russian and Chinese businesses. And in two stories of a bit more somber of a note, Sandra Day O'Connor, the first woman to serve on the U.S. Supreme Court, has announced her retirement from the public light due to a likely diagnosis of Alzheimer's. She said she has been diagnosed for a while with the early stages of dementia, and apparently it has gotten to the point where public appearances are just no longer an option. Of course, we pray for her and her family, and that's a very sad thing. And that, it is what it is. I really don't have much to add to it. And on a somewhat related note to that, World Wrestling Entertainment's Universal Champion Roman Reigns also relinquished his title last night and announced a temporary retirement due to a resurgence of leukemia. I think this is of note because if you talk about a guy who's in really good health, young, he's only 5 years older than me. It's just one of those things that really makes you realize, like, this type of thing can really happen to anybody, and it can happen in your absolute prime. And it's really kind of a wake-up call, and people need to, take your health seriously. Think about your body, pay attention to your body, because it's not just 88-year-old people like Sandra Day O'Connor who can get ill. It can happen to 33-year-old athletes in the prime of their life as well. And it can happen to you, and it can happen to me. So, just something to think about. Anyway, guys, have a great night. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We've been getting a lot of support recently, especially from people here in Florida, and I appreciate that. Hopefully we'll see you in the next video, and peace.